We have great information for you, and I want to first introduce our panelists who are sitting up here. You're going to hear from the first three in the first hour and the last two and me in the second hour. First of all, I am Mimi Kennedy. I have been the founding advisory board chair of Progressive Democrats of America. For a while I headed their election integrity task force, and I have been working on election integrity in California since 2006. I was introduced to the issue by watching the NAACP hearings on Florida in 2000, and the visible and overt racism that we saw in those hearings still exists, and it has been enabled and amplified by electronic voting. All right. I'm starting here. First on my left is Emily Levy. She's been a leader in the election integrity and transparency movement since 2004, when she coordinated the first phase of the most in-depth investigation into the presidential election of Ohio, 2004. She's been an activist since childhood, working on issues from nuclear power to LGBTQ rights. She's now Director of Communications for AUDITelectionsUSA, Americans United for Democracy, Integrity, and Transparency in Elections. And she's going to talk to you about their national project today. Next to her is the great Bob Fitrakis. I'm sure many of you know his name. He is editor and publisher of the excellent Columbus Free Press that does so much investigative research and discovery. He's a political science professor at Columbus State Community College, and he and Harvey Wasserman co-authored many books on election theft, the latest of which is Strip and Flip Disaster: America's Stolen Elections. Next to him, his co-author and the great colleague of election transparency, among other things, Harvey Wasserman. He's a six-decade activist. He coined the term "no nukes," and he helped us shut down San Onofre in California, soon to be followed by Diablo Canyon. He's a great hippie friend from the old days, so he knows where some bodies are buried in his brain. We remember a lot, and we're not going to let it win. Next to him is the great Judy Alter, Dr. Judy Alter. She has led Protect California Ballots for over a decade, working in Los Angeles to observe everything at the LA Registrar. In 2004, she was part of Recount New Mexico, and it was she who discovered that the straight party ticket vote recorded no vote for president. Yeah. Wow. So the 16 states who used that had enormous undervotes for presidency. That was Judy's discovery. Thank you for that, Judy. And next to her is the wonderful Jim Soper, who I turn to at every legislative battle we have. He's the co-chair of the Voting Rights Task Force, and he's been a member with that since 2005 in Northern California. He's the author of the website countedascast.org, great information there, and he is a senior software consultant, and he worked with Digital Equipment Corp as that. It was the second largest computer company on the planet when he worked for it, and he'll talk to you about what happens with digital companies. So that's who you're going to hear from, Judy, Jim, and me, focusing on California and LA. You need to know this stuff. We have a letter and an action component in the second half, and the first half you're going to get the overview. You will see that this is a very white panel at a very intersectional event. And one of the first things I wanted to do was introduce to you a man on whose shoulders we stand. Everything we're doing has been helped and supported by a discovery from a man from Memphis, Tennessee, named Benny Smith. Benny Smith. He worked with Bev Harris of Black Box Voting, one of the first great investigators into election fraud. And I'm going to show you a 2.5 minutes culled from a Benny Smith interview about what digital capacity is in all our computer counts, even of paper ballots.
When I built this program, I built it in disbelief, right? I started off saying it was a long shot, right? There's no way the people are have the ability to do something like that, right? And then the more I got to one step in finding out, asking what if I'm wrong, right? Getting and finding out that's right and getting further and further, then it turned into, man, I gotta build this. I gotta build it. I gotta show just how laughable it is, just how egregious it is, just how scalable it is, just how much control you can actually have. And here you have it. Everybody can see it. Now people can see, from start to finish, this is what it looks like if you really do it. And hopefully this will start a dialogue. It'll start a conversation about where the future of democracy should be as it comes to counting votes.
It's not just a Memphis problem. It's not just a black problem. It is an American problem. We got to be the force to make the change. Yeah. It starts here. It starts now. It starts with us. Yeah.
Magic, we dubbed it that. It's migrated to almost every computer that counts votes in the United States, including scanners of paper ballots. That's why we hear that the intrusions were into election management systems. That's where you get all the voters, Republican, Democrat, whether they're likely to vote, who votes, vote by mail. You got all that. And that's your ingredients. You set your recipe to make sure your person wins by 50%. Sometimes there's a glitch because you didn't set your percentage high enough. Democrats say, or black people, or brown people, or anybody you wish wouldn't vote are voting in big numbers. You have to glitch it down, reset your percentage. This can be done on a USB, it can be done live, it can be done by an insider, it can be done by I don't know how. But that's why we're presenting you with solutions and why they're so important to everything we're going to talk about. Thank you very much. I am now going to hand it over to Emily Levy of AUDITelectionsUSA.
Thank you. Is this picking up?
Yep.
Is it picking up? Thank you all for being here. I know it's been a really long weekend, and I want to really tell you I appreciate you taking the time to come and learn about the issues we're talking about today, and we will do our best to give you as much good information as we can in the short time we've got together. I have a question for you. Down? Better? Okay. Thank you. I have a question for you. How many of you here would trust elections more if they were counted by communities than by riggable, hackable voting machines? I think that's just about every hand. Yeah, I feel the same way, and that's why I started working in 2004 on this issue, and I've worked on a bunch of projects. I live in Northern California, and I've been working on election integrity and transparency projects around the country. And if you told me a couple of years ago that I would be here today speaking with you about a solution to some of the the election transparency issues we face that actually uses electronic voting machines, I would not have believed you. But that's actually what I'm here to talk to you about today. I absolutely believe that the best system for counting our votes is votes cast on paper ballots, counted by human beings in full public view at the precinct on election night. And I believe that we can get there, but I don't think we can get there in one step. So what I'm talking to you about today is how I think we can get there from here. AUDITeUSA, the group with a long name that maybe said Americans United for Democracy, Integrity, and Transparency in Elections, is working on a project that uses technology that's currently in use. It doesn't require, our plan doesn't require passing any new laws, and it won't even cost a ton of money. So I want to give you a little bit of background so that you can understand what we're talking about. It's tricky to talk about this stuff because it gets really techy really fast, and I'm going to try not to do that. So over the years, when election integrity advocates, like folks on this panel here, try to get access to paper ballots after an election to count them. Actually, I want to talk about something else first. I just skipped a part. I'm sorry. So over the years, when we express doubts about the security of electronic vote counting systems, we get told, don't worry, these systems are tested. They go through extensive what's called logic and accuracy testing before every election. And I want to tell you why that's not good enough. You may have heard a few years ago about the Volkswagen emissions scandal. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
To some of you? So it's a long story and I won't go into the details. You can look it up online if you want to know more about it. But basically, 580,000 vehicles in the US alone, Audis, VWs, and Porsches, were programmed to behave differently, to have the emissions control system turned on when they were hooked up to testing equipment and turned off again when they were detached. So these vehicles passed the smog checks. It feels like I'm not getting picked up. There we go. These vehicles passed the smog checks, but then when they went onto the road, they were putting out, let's see if I get this number right, 400 times the allowable limits of toxins. Why am I mentioning that here? Because the exact same thing is possible, and we believe sometimes happens with electronic voting systems. They can be programmed to behave one way when they're in testing mode and another way on election day. They can even be programmed, if you say, well, why don't you test them on election mode? There are ways that they can be programmed so that they behave one day during the actual hours that the real election is happening and another way during any other hours. And so we need to not just test the machines, but also have a way to make sure that the vote counts are correct. Well, in much of the country, people vote on paper ballots, so can't we just count the paper ballots? It seems like an obvious thing to do, doesn't it? But every time we try to do that, to investigate an election by counting the paper ballots, we get told, we can't let you see the paper ballots unless you can prove fraud. Well, how are we going to prove fraud before you let us see the evidence, which is the paper ballots? It's a catch-22 situation, and because of it, a lot of elections that needed investigation have not gotten investigated. But here's the good news. Over the past several years, election jurisdictions all around the country have started replacing their old, crappy systems with newer systems that actually have a built-in security feature. So the systems I'm talking about still use paper ballots for voting, which is absolutely crucial. But instead of being counted on the old optical scanners, they're counted on digital scanners. Those are different things, and a lot of people get them mixed up, but there's a really key difference. With digital scanners, when the ballot is fed into the scanner takes a digital image of each ballot, both sides if it's voted on both sides, and it's the votes on the images, not the votes on the paper ballots, that are counted. So that there are actually two documents that are both important, the original paper ballot and the digital image. And why that's key is that unlike the paper ballots, with digital images, a whole bunch of copies can be made of that digital image file, and there's no reason to keep the public from seeing those. So a candidate or a community that sponsored a proposition on the ballot, or a community group can theoretically get those images and count the votes on them and see if if the official vote count was accurate. So, where am I in here? So in some situations, people may want to only count one race. Let's say your group has gotten a proposition on the ballot. You might only want to count the votes about your proposition. In smaller communities, people may want to count every single ballot and every single vote on every single ballot. And both of those would be possible with this technology. So the existence of these ballot images makes several really important things possible. One is that it can help us detect fraudulent election results. The second is that it can provide feedback on where the system needs strengthening, so that the longer we're doing the system, the better everything can get. So it can kind of, create a feedback loop, basically. The third thing is that it can help us detect hacking and rigging, so that we can actually catch the people doing it and stop them. And the last one is that it can make public oversight of elections possible again, and could maybe even restore the public's trust in elections. So it's a really important development in the potential for election security. But Houston, we have a problem. It turns out that in many places around the country, this feature is not being used to its full capacity. Election officials are actually failing to use this election security feature of their machines. And these machines are in use in 42 or 44 states right now. So here's a map, and it may need a little bit of updating, but the states that are colored in dark blue are states where some or all of the votes are counted using digital scanners. There are 11 states that that's the only system they use, and the other states are partial. And on our website, there's more details about where these systems are in use. So I want you to let this sink in. With all of the talk about the need for election security right now, in many places, election officials are failing to use election security features that exist in the voting systems that they administer. In fact, in some places, we're discovering that they're destroying the ballot images. Or when we call them up, they say, we never turned that feature on. Well, the machines can't count votes without that feature being on, because they count the votes on the images. So we're on the case. We're really working on changing this, and we need your help. And I want to describe briefly what our project is. It's in 3 phases. The first is to make sure the ballot images are preserved everywhere, that no one is destroying them. And we've already gotten a court ruling in Arizona and a directive from the Secretary of State in Ohio that ballot images have to be preserved. So making sure they're preserved everywhere, which we can do with your help, is stage 1 of the project. Stage 2 is to get access to those images so communities can count them. New York State issued a ruling a few months ago that ballot images are part of the public record. Oh, and I forgot to say a really important thing, which is that these records are mandated by law to be saved. So any election official who destroys them is committing a crime. Small detail I left out there.
Why aren't they going to jail?
So preserving the images is the second phase, and the first phase. The second phase is accessing the images, and the third phase is actually counting the votes that are on the images. And we're in the process of setting up a pilot project for that, which we're hoping to do before November's election, so that any community that can get access to ballot images from this November's election will know what to do with them, and we'll be able to train them how to do that. So all of this could lead to challenging elections where the announced results are incorrect. And I'm wondering if you think, if we've got proof that the machines are not counting properly, and the paper ballots already exist, how many elections would it take before we stop using those machines? So that's why I think that this is the pathway to paper ballots counted by human beings, is because it will provide the proof that we need that we can't trust the machines. So this is a huge project, and I think it's doable. And I want to speak now specifically to anybody who feels hopeless about us ever having an election system we can trust. I know this is only one of the many problems of the election system. It's really easy to feel hopeless and to feel helpless that you can do anything about it. And I want you to know that you actually can do something about it, and we can help you take action. Right now, we need people to help us call counties, specific counties around the country, and find out what their practices are regarding ballot images. And it's actually possible that a few phone calls from you could mean that key evidence to establishing whether the election results are correct could be preserved that would have otherwise been discarded. So I think it's a really key thing when we are trying to be activists and not burn out, to see places where a small action can make a big difference. So I want to invite you to volunteer with us, and John, can you put up the information? There's two ways you can sign up with us. One is to text the word audit to the phone number that's on the screen, 773-770-4377. And if somebody who's watching on Facebook could put that in the comments, that would be great, 773-770-4377, or go to AUDITelectionsUSA.org. Thank you so much.
I want to make sure everybody knows the ballot images, each ballot has a unique identification number when it is counted, and it is stamped, it's supposed to be stamped on the paper ballot, and the image gets the same number. So when the citizens can see, when the public can see, don't have to be citizens, the public can see the ballot images and count the accuracy of the race they're interested in, or all of them. They then need to go to the paper ballots randomly and say, what does 1029 say? What does ballot 843 say? And with the ballot image, I think something's going on. With the ballot image project, that would be a statistical audit, if you like, that the images were not messed with. I just wanted you to know that aspect of it, because on federal legislation, sure enough, some people seized on this wonderful work and went, oh, then we'll just audit the ballot images on a machine, and you'll still never see the paper ballots. And we want to make very clear that ain't good enough. The ballot image destruction, however, is a sure sign that you're planning something nefarious, and we want it to stop. Okay, next in line, we have Bob Fitrakis. Coming at you, Bob.
All right, it's a privilege for me to be here. It was really the left coast that supported me in 2004 when I was an attorney in Ohio and had the privilege of being 1 in 4 to sue in a case known as Moss v. Bush, which resulted in the first ever challenge to an entire electoral college. In a state, you remember the very brave Barbara Boxer, who allowed Stephanie Tubbs Jones to appear before the U.S. Senate and actually challenged the entire electoral slate, the Republican slate from Ohio. So that all started out here. Wasn't well received in Ohio. Again, they thought I was mentally unstable, but I was welcomed out here on the left coast. People out here realized I had a PhD in political science, and I could count. So you had a very high standard, but still in Ohio, Harvey and I are not well received. I just published for this event a paper I prepared for the American Political Science Association called Are U.S. Elections Legitimate? The History of Electronic Voting. Spoiler, they're not legitimate. They do not pass the fundamental test of transparency. And I say this as the person in 1994 that co-wrote the International Observer report for the first free elections in El Salvador and edited that report and delivered it to the United Nations. If what happened in the United States would have happened in El Salvador, I would have simply written the following words: presumption of fraud, non-transparent election. Okay, look, and on my side are some real radical forces. One, James Woolsey, who co-wrote an article in the New York Times saying you can't have proprietary secret software and no ballots and call it a free election. I don't know how he arrived at that conclusion, but he may have borrowed, and let me remind you of this. In the 2016 election, if we applied the standards of the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Agency on International Development, that in 13 states, 12 of them that went for Trump, were they not U.S. states? If they were sovereign countries, the U.S. State Department would not have recognized their elections as legitimate because of the exit polls. Okay, the only reason they're legitimate is because they're in the United States, which has 50 different state standards. So, keep that in mind as we talk about this. And if we go back further, let me point out who helped bring us electronic, non-transparent voting. One of the big early pushers, and this is in my paper, 1950, the Bureau of Social Science Research. It was founded as the School of Social Sciences and Public Affairs at American University. In 1953, as a nonprofit, it helped overthrow the democratic government of Mossadegh in Iran. So they're one of the forces that have long pushed electronic voting. We were using mainframe computers beginning in the 1960s to count votes. Let me refer in 1974, the U.S. General Accounting Office commissioned a year-long study on the rise of electronic voting equipment. In 1975, Roy G. Saltman, an electronics expert at the National Bureau of Standards, warned about the dangers of electronic voting. In his pamphlet, Effective Use of Computing Technology in Vote Counting, he wrote this, quote, increasing computerization of election-related functions may result in the loss of effective controls over these functions by responsible authorities, and that this loss of control may increase the possibility of vote fraud. And that is National Bureau of Standards Special Publication 50-30. It was repeated 3 times. Every time they came to the same conclusion. If you allow private, for-profit companies that are partisan to secretly count your votes without paper, your elections are automatically non-transparent and compromised. How difficult is that to understand? Right? We're using secret software. We're non-transparent. And our election results, by our own standards, are indicating that someone, we understand maybe Russians, but what the hell with the Russians? What about the private partisan companies and their technicians that belong to the Right to Life movement, Ryad in Ohio, Michael Connell, and others that are born-again Christians, Jeff Averbeck at Smart Tech? Why aren't we worried about partisan, hardcore right-wing, right-to-lifers who believe in a moral law that's higher, that they have the right to change things, to, quote, stop abortion in America, being deeply embedded in our election system. Why is this tolerated? Okay. And I'm here to be optimistic after saying a few things. In 2012 and 2016, I would argue that, I've been lucky to be involved in the 2004 election and, of course, the suit against King Lincoln Brunsville suit against Blackwell, where we sued for 5 years and uncovered all sorts of information until Mike Connell suddenly died in a small plane crash that ended the process. I'll wrap up here in a minute, but I also sued Edison, right? The Edison Research Company, arguing in the Edison Research Company that they're working with the state. Here's the problem. When you have private exit companies that agree that how implausible the final vote count is, they're going to assume that's right. They become co-conspirators and criminal state actors. So I sued and said these people are state actors because no matter what the final vote will be, no matter how implausible it will be, they will accept the results. So we need to do investigative reporting, right? And part of that isn't hard if you've got people monitoring the Board of Elections in 88 counties, and 3 of them hit 37 and flipped the results. And then they said, well, that was just human error. What human error? It's all being transmitted by thumb drives and computer. No one is typing this stuff in. So we need to stand up, we need to do investigative research, we need to sue, and we need to create non-transparency, and we also need to occupy the machines that are flipping and take our arrest like any decent moral movement, because the system itself is fundamentally illegitimate and non-transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. All right, I want to make sure that we distribute white cards. Those of you with questions, Chris, would you come up and just make sure these white cards get distributed for Larry? Thank you. Wrong microphone? Am I okay? All right. The next person you're going to hear from, I don't want to take a minute away from a panelist, is the great Harvey Wasserman.
Hi everybody, Bob's a tough act to follow. I do want to mention one thing. In my other life, I'm in the solar business and trying to solarize Los Angeles. If we had a vote, it would happen overnight. Maybe the $60 billion Jerry Brown's wasting on that ridiculous train could go to putting solar panels on all the roofs in California. But my neighbor and friend, Ellie Mafuda, is back there. If you have a rooftop that you think might be solarized, go talk to Ellie. He'll give me your address and your phone bill, and we'll let you know if you can have solar on your roof. That's a way of voting against nuclear power and against the Diablo Canyon atomic reactor. So see Ellie afterwards if you think you can solarize your roof. It'd be a great thing. What do you need here? Try up, higher, tighter. All right, okay. I would repeat a line from Bonnie Raitt, but she was adjusting her guitar, and she looked at the guy and said, "Kiss me before you do that," but I don't think I'll apply here. Anyway, I'm going to talk about disenfranchisement and vote stripping. This is our latest and our summary book, The Strip and Flip Disaster of America's Stolen Election, and Bob, in his classical form, has talked about the illegitimacy of the vote count. The other half of that is stripping the vote count, making sure that suspected Democrats or suspected black people or progressives don't get the ballot in the first place. And I have personal inspiration for this. I lived in the same house in Ohio from 1984 up through and beyond 2004. And in 2004, I called in and wrote away to get an absentee ballot, and they told me they wouldn't give me one, even though I've been in the same house for 20 years. I had to call them 4 times, and I finally got it when I said, I'm with the media. So, the bottom line is here that nothing works in this country for the domination of the right-wing corporations without preventing people that they don't want from voting. And this goes way, way back. The original vote stripping happened in the Constitution of the United States. Not exactly stripping, but as you know, in the Electoral College, in the beginning, slave owners were allowed to count their slaves for 3/5 of a vote, even though the slaves weren't allowed to vote, obviously. And that has carried through when black people helped end slavery during the Civil War. In the years after the Civil War, the Confederacy, or the formal Confederacy, and the Ku Klux Klan invented Jim Crow. And Jim Crow, basically, there was a series of laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, all this other stuff, the grandfather clause, if your grandfather had been a slave, you couldn't vote. All that stuff was used to prevent black people from voting. And we then moved up, and there are many, many incarnations of that, until the most important one in modern times, which has been the drug war. And I really, it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on black people voting. And has been since 1971, when Nixon, in the middle of the Vietnam War and the collapse of the ecology and all this other stuff going on in America, pronounced that drugs were the #1 problem in America. The real #1 problem in Nixon's mind was that black people, especially in the South, were still voting. And he wanted to end that, so they instituted the drug war. This is a number that you have to think about for a minute. More than 41 million arrests have occurred in the drug war. More than half black and Hispanic, even though blacks and Hispanics don't use drugs in any different proportion than white people in this country. And when you consider that there are about 35 million blacks and about 35 million Hispanics in this country, and more than 20 million of them have been arrested in the drug war, you realize that every family in the black and Hispanic community has been affected by this. And this was the keystone of Nixon's Southern strategy. When the Democrats, when Johnson and Kennedy went for civil rights and the Voting Rights Act, Nixon and the Republicans realized that they could get all the white people, or most of the white people, most of the racist white people in the South, to become Republicans instead of Democrats, as they had been since 1828, when Andrew Jackson formed the Democratic Party. But Nixon understood, and John Ehrlichman has had a very direct quote on this, Nixon understood that you couldn't carry the South with just white people. If in many of the states of the former Confederacy, as many as 40% of the people are black. And we just saw an expression of this in the senatorial race in Alabama, where black people actually came out in numbers, and they forced the voting rights in, and they got rid of a horrible racist and elected a white guy. And we're going to see, a Democrat, and we're going to see this most importantly now in the governor race in Georgia, where Stacey Abrams, a black woman, you could not invent two more dissimilar candidates. Stacey Abrams, a very progressive and aware black woman, is running against the Klansmen, basically. I'd love to see the televised debates on this. I wonder if yes, thank you. I wonder if he's going to wear like white robes for their debate. That would be pretty apropos. Maybe have like a burning cross in the back, So, but what's critical, and we saw this in an off election with John Ossoff, a wimpy, spineless Democrat who allowed them to steal the election from him in a special congressional race. And we've just seen the same thing, and I just can't, I am so livid about this. I have moved from Central Ohio. I'm now a Californian, but I lived there for many, 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 many years. And this guy who just ran in this special election, which the whole world was watching, who did not even consult with Bob across the street. This Democratic candidate in town with the most advanced election protection advocate in the world couldn't be bothered to come across town and talk to Bob about protecting the election. And of course he lost by a minuscule amount of votes, which I'm sure was fraudulent. And part of the magic for them is to prevent people from voting. You know, if you're black, if you're Hispanic, if you're young, if you look like you might be a Democrat and you show up to certain precincts, if you can find your precinct anymore, they will tell you you're not on the voter rolls, and they'll hand you a provisional ballot. You'll fill out the provisional ballot, and you walk out the door, and that ballot will go in the trash. And that is how Donald Trump is in the White House. And we've had 3 out of 4 candidates, Democratic candidates for president, who won their election even after the voter rolls were stripped, and have said not a word. Al Gore, who will be here tomorrow, by the way, doing a training, which I applied for and I haven't heard back yet. And then John Kerry, Al Gore in 2000, John Kerry in 2004, Hillary Clinton in 2016. All 3 of them legitimately won their elections, especially after the vote counts, even after the vote counts were stripped. And they've said not a word. Nothing since 2000. The Democratic Party has done nothing of significance to stop the voter roll stripping by the Republicans, even now with their friends, the Russians. John Kerry, we showed him his people 3 ways from Sunday, how they stripped the voter rolls. 300,000 people in Ohio alone stripped off the voter rolls in the onset of the 2004 election. We showed Kerry's people how they did it, and not a word from them. And now Chris Kobach is doing it by the millions. Greg Powers is here somewhere. He showed how the choice point in 2000 and then cross-check in 2016 has been used to strip the voter rolls, prevent black people and Hispanics, young people, homeless, elders from voting. And the Democratic Party has done nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so here we are, even if we get a fair vote count, which we may be getting closer and closer to, there are indications our work is paying off, but they're still preventing people from voting. They're still handing out provisional ballots, just like they did in the Jim Crow South in the 1960s, and so 1860s, and the 1960s. So you see that the use of the criminal justice system, which is a misnomer if there ever was one, has been used to keep these Republicans in power, and they're going to continue to do it. And that we are the antidote. But you know, if you have a situation, you've got a 31-year-old guy running for Congress in Central Ohio as a Democrat, and he can't talk to Bob Fitrakis and the rest of us about how to protect the election. What is wrong with these people? And you know, it's going to continue. They're going to continue to strip the voter rolls. And even if we get a fair vote count, we got to make sure that everybody, all American citizens, have the right to vote, or we're going nowhere. And it's not going to be the Democratic Party that makes that call. So thank you much, and let's keep it going.
Proud how the strip and flip worked, even on paper ballots in Los Angeles County in the June primary. As background, how many heard in Brooklyn all the young Bernie voters somehow got stripped from the voter rolls, so that when they went to vote, they were not allowed to vote except provisionally? Well, in LA County in June, there was a glitch, and 118,000 legitimately registered voters who were on the Secretary of State's website as registered were dropped from the LA County sign-in rosters that were operating at the precinct. So 118,000 potential voters went to vote, and their poll workers said, you're not on the rolls, but they knew they were. They were allowed to vote provisionally. 92,000 provisional votes were created in June in LA County by this one error. This one error. So I am suspicious, because what I'm going to talk about, and what I have a letter to Alex Padilla about that I want you to take before you leave, but stay for the next hour. We passed a law, AB 840, last year. Jim Soper will talk about this, that exempted all provisional ballots and all late arriving mail ballots, which due to recent legislation can arrive up to 3 days after the election and still be counted. So many, many more mail ballots arriving than used to be counted are now counted. All of those ballots and all provisionals are counted on computer, scanned in every county of California, and that computer count is now newly and officially outside the audit pool. We never will audit the count from the computer of any late mail ballots or any provisionals. In other words, only the results that you hear after election night and just after election night will be hand audited for accuracy to 1%. That's California law. Well, the legislature changed California law and when it takes too long to get all the other ones processed out of their envelopes, so they're going to be counted late and we won't audit that count. Believe you me, the federal balance of power may come down to California, and believe you me, there will suddenly be more professionals than ever. It was a dry run in LA County. Let's see how many we can create. Work very successfully, and we may have the federal balance of power in congressional districts in California and all these rural counties, right? Well, they're going to flip red to blue. Well, maybe they'll stay red and nobody will question it, and that will happen on a manipulated computer count that will never be hand audited. That happened by our legislators. Jim will talk about it in the second hour. I have a letter. I want you to take it, sign it, send it to Alex Padilla. There will be at change.org. We're going to ramp up this thing. He has to issue an emergency regulation or we are wide open. We've left the door unlocked. We took good election transparency, turned it into lousy election transparency. Jim will tell you kind of how it happened. It's horrible. So, thank you. I think that's all I have to say. Please take one of these. It'll be right here. Now, we do have Q&A, but because everything's running late, we're going to have other people coming in here for the 1:30 session. And did you all get white ballots, white cards to write a question? I have one, and I'm going to let, it's about blockchain. Who wants to answer it? Yes, Jim, our software expert. He's going to answer that, and then we'll conclude this panel.
Question is, could blockchain be used to create a vote counting system gold standard even more trustworthy than hand-counted paper ballots or any other system? The answer is hell no.
Not just.
The first principle answer is that when you're using blockchain, generally you're talking internet voting. And by definition, when you go to internet, or people are pushing smartphone voting now, which is also on the internet, you're using paperless system, no paper ballots. There's no backup when something goes wrong. They've had burps, shall we say, with, I don't know, $500 million being stolen from Bitcoin. And trying to figure out what happened when you have all this information scattered around the internet is a nightmare. So no, that's the first thing. You cannot recover when you have a problem because you have no paper ballots. Secondly, and this is going off into internet voting and smartphone voting, but that's what they're talking about. If you're voting on your smartphone or maybe your IP address, they know who you are. They've got your phone number. They know how you're going to vote. They can plant a fake voting app on your computer or on your smartphone, and you will never know the difference.
Wow.
Or you try to transmit it. Again, with smartphone voting, you're going to trust AT&T and Verizon to deliver that ballot properly? Hell no. Good luck with that. So the answer is hell no. Now, Dr. David Jefferson, if you Google David Jefferson, blockchain voting, he just wrote an article in the past 2 weeks. It should be up on the verifiedvoting.org website about why blockchain, or what people think of as Bitcoin, is not viable. He goes into detail. This is a world-class expert, and he explains there's a half a dozen places where this doesn't work. I just explained 2. So there's 4 others. I'm not going to go into it because we don't have the time.
Thank you.
The answer is hell no.
Hell no. Judy, I promised that you would have a chance to make a comment or ask a question based on the panel so far before we...
That was really sweet of you to remember. I would like John Brakey and Emily and anyone else to clarify when you have the ballot images, and you want to match them with the ballot, and since the ballot image is digital, how do you actually count the ballot image?
Since the ballot image is digital, and Judy wants to know, how do you actually count the ballot image?
there are a few possibilities for this, and the one at this point that I'm the most excited about is you actually you get your team in a room and you use a projector to project the images onto a screen or onto the wall, and you have people in the audience in the participating group with clickers who click. So one person might be making a click every time there's a vote for one candidate, another person making a click when there's a vote for the candidate they're in charge of tracking, and then you compare them, and if they don't match, you go back and check again. So that's what we're going to be piloting. That's one way of doing it. Some people are saying that it's possible to make off-the-shelf software that would do this, and I know that raises a whole bunch of other questions about how do you know whether to trust that. What I first described is what we're going to be piloting soon. And I'm sorry? Yeah. But they can be viewed. They're images that can be viewed and then counted.
All right. I had another question, and I just people need a break. But why do you think Gore and other Democrats are so gutless in not protesting these electoral fraudulent irregularities?
They're Democrats.
Beg your pardon?
They're Democrats.
They're Democrats. Well, yeah, we got some good ones too, though, but I know what you mean. They are really silent on this. I'm going to let Harvey take that, but I am just going to say, do you remember when Gore was criticized because he gave a community center to some Asian Americans in San Francisco, and they considered that a bribe for helping his campaign, and he had to apologize and almost get out of the campaign over that, compared to what Donald Trump is being talked about having done, because it was foreign money in Al Gore's campaign. Anyway, just saying, they get burned, but they don't fight. Harvey?
Actually,
Switch it on. No, you want to come up to this one? It's on. Okay.
Okay, I should talk into it. I was part of Recount New Mexico because they didn't need us in 204 in Ohio. So I go back working with Bob all that time. But I followed all the action with Kerry and what we were told, and I'm hesitant to say it, but evidently it was validated about 3 times, that Kerry's wife, her kids, remember Kerry married the Heights? Their lives were threatened.
I think that's reasonable. Also, you have to remember the Democrats really don't want black people voting either. And when they're up against the Republicans, that's one thing. But we saw the use the Democrats made of this stripping and flipping device to prevent Bernie from getting the nomination.
Yep.
Bernie was, as far as I can tell, the rightful nominee. I think the Democrats are way more comfortable with Donald Trump than they would be with Bernie Sanders.
Hell yes.
They need that. They want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to adjourn this. I want to begin as close to now as possible. Is it 1:30 yet? Yeah, and that's when we're supposed to begin the next one. And we're going to have a wonderful song from my friend Tom English to convene us. So when you hear some singing, come on back in. Please don't leave. Tom, do you just want to come up and start? Yes. And at 3 o'clock is going to be the MLK celebration, nonviolence, Martin Luther King, and there's going to be a lot of artists and a lot of song and a lot of inspiration there. Again, someone whose shoulders we all stand on, because it's about the civil rights of a democracy being able to exist in a world that doesn't want anything but war, greed, and profit. We're going to win. Okay, Tom.
Just a second. How the hell? All right, we're going to talk about your vote. What's that? Don't cover my mouth with the mic, so that's good. All right. We're going to talk about your vote. We're going to get right down to the nuts and bolts, the bolts that lock to guarantee your vote counted carefully, accurately, with transparency, so that everybody counting in the room can see that the total tabulation has integrity, because that is the foundation of democracy. All the me for you and the you for me and the us all being all we can be gets down to having all the opportunity we need to turn our dreams into reality. So the vote for the one that you choose to see there, grounding your desires in reality legalistically, must be counted with attention and efficiency, free of all manipulation electronically. And that's why human hands and human eyes and clear and focused human minds, we gotta pass those ballots down the line, and I check your count, you check mine, 'cause those who make those vote machines hide David Koch behind those screens. All human life on earth demands we count all votes with human hands. Now there are those who would have us think that electronic voting machines don't stink. They say quick and easy is the choice to choose, so that we can name a winner on the evening news. But upon examination of the hackability, votes on those machines have no trackability. Plus, machines, they can be set so that you can change the total that a candidate will get. You can set one candidate 100 votes ahead, the other one 100 votes behind instead. And once that vote count's pre-designed, one candidate stays 200 votes behind. And then when you vote and you hit done, there's no way to validate the way you voted. None. There's no mark on paper. There's no proof. Pixels of pixel dust. Gone. Poof. And that's why human hands and human eyes and clear and focused human minds, we gotta pass those ballots down the line, and I check your count, you check mine, 'cause those who make those vote machines hide fracking waste behind those screens. All human life on earth demands we count all votes with human hands. Another little game that they love to play to take our right to vote away is a nasty little scam called the voter purge. And this is how they work that particular scourge. Say Joseph R. Johnson has a felony. Well, Thomas P. Johnson teaches chemistry. Du Bois L. Johnson's a beloved physician, and Chris O. Johnson rebuilds transmissions. No matter what the first or the middle name, all with the name of Johnson are removed the same. Upstanding citizens arrive at the polls to find their names gone from the voter rolls. A provisional ballot is then presented to see all their votes are prevented. That ballot won't be counted till who knows when. The election is done and lost by then. And that's why human hands and human eyes and clear and focused human minds, we gotta pass those ballots down the line, and I check your count, you check mine, 'cause those who make those vote machines hide for-profit prisons behind those screens. All human life on earth demands we count all vote with human hands. Human hands, human hands. We gotta pound those votes with human hands. We gotta grab those electronic scans. We gotta chuck them all in garbage cans. That's what democracy demands. That's how democracy expands, with human eyes and human hands and a human mind that understands. We gotta count them all.
Wow.
English. All right, we're 1:41. We're going to just fold right into our second hour.
Really?
You can leave if you want. We've heard, but I like it when you stay here. But it's a good seat about California legislation. It's really affecting the way you all are going to vote in the future. You need to understand it. And you're going to hear from Jim Soper how the lethal AB 840 got passed, why the legislators are clueless, why we end up in this position, and he has other aspects of legislation he can explain too. I had promised I was going to give an overview of federal legislation. Everybody asks, why don't the Democrats do something? How can the federal government allow this to go on? Well, there are 2 election bills that were written in the Senate this session. You know Congress ain't doing nothing, and the Senate isn't even doing the Supreme Court because we're in such a corrupt crisis that nobody can agree on anything. Nonetheless, 2 election bills were written. One of them, the Secure Elections Act, was featured on NPR. Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat, signed on to it. It's from a Republican from Utah. And a colleague that began in election integrity with PDA and has since moved to National Election Defense Coalition with the writer Victoria Collier, whose explosive 2008 article in Harper's about election rigging is said to have done quite a bit to have elected Obama the first time, because it made people scared to rig the presidential. Anyway, Ben has concentrated on Capitol Hill. He tried to get involved in the Secure Elections Act, work with the Republicans, and they did have language about ballot images and audits. But the audits, Ben inserted language in parenthesis, by hand, not by device. The Republicans took that language out. He went back, fought to get it back in, meaning the only hand audits of computer counts would be that parenthetical language in this bill. And they took it out, and the GOP withdrew from the bill. It's going nowhere. Ron Wyden's bill, which is an excellent bill, it has hand audits. It can lead to full hand counting. It has preservation of ballot images, but not just relying on ballot images. It's a good bill. It's going nowhere. No Republicans have signed on, and it's dead in the water in this corrupt Congress. So I'm sorry to report that, but given the Help America Vote Act, I say no federal mandates are better than bad federal mandates. That's why everyone on this panel is working very specifically as they can, state to state, county by county. I want to open, John, do we have the first card? LA County is getting a new voting system. We have more voters here than in 39 of the 50 states. So it's a very important jurisdiction, but and we have several congressional districts. It's important we have good election transparency. I was on the principals committee to establish principles for the new system, and I was one of the only ones saying paper ballot or no go. And I had many people against me saying electronic voting, let's vote on our phones, the kids want to vote on their iPads, come on, let's get with it. I said, no, it's got to be a paper ballot that's independently counted, not on the machine that makes it. You don't take a memory stick or a memory card out of that machine. You take those paper ballots to a central tabulator and you count them in full view of the public. There's a wrinkle in that this, and Judy will talk about this, we now are going to have 10 days of early voting. We're going to have 700 vote centers. We're going to have them in grocery stores, at the Ralphs, or at the post office, and these locked ballot boxes that our paper ballots go in those places will be taken by armored car and sheriff every night to the central tabulator. I'm going to want video cameras on all that, video cameras on a locked cage where everything's stored, but that's down the line. So you know, LA is going to have 10 days early voting so poor people can vote, so people don't have to drive 2.5 hours in one day to vote, so that caregivers who cannot get a day off when they're caring for a quadriplegic person that they're not going to let die, those people want to vote. And so 10 days early voting at 700 vote centers where you can go to any vote center and vote. You don't have to get to your precinct anymore. You can go to the nearest one. And so 700 times 10 days is 7,000 chances to vote, whereas right now we have 3,000 some precincts open on one day. And if you don't get that done, you have to do a mail ballot. And if you ask for a mail ballot, you might end up provisional. Kind of a mess. So I like some parts of it, and I don't like others. Judy will talk about it. Here's the voting solutions, VSAP they call it, creating the voting experience, language I detest, but there it is, for the future. Here's a county, 4,000 square miles, 10 million people. We got 5.2 registered voters. What next? A very diverse electorate, and we got all his languages. I always say 9. Is it 9? It's 9 languages. That makes it hard. We have always printed ballot materials in 9 languages. It's the law. In the voting center, you're going to be able to bring up your ballot on a screen, yes, a touch screen, in any language you want, but after you're done on the touch screen, out comes your paper ballot, and that's what's counted, and you have not cast your vote, says the screen, until you approve and affirm that ballot and watch it go back in the lockbox. You're not done voting. You have not voted on this screen. It is not counting your ballot. It's making paper ballot. In 9 languages. It was the law. Okay, go. Okay, we need to replace the existing system for sure, and there was no system available on the private market, and we didn't want it anyway. A new voter experience, yeah, well, okay, a lot of this is kind of corporate speak. I'm not crazy about it. And this was the timeline. This is all available on the VSAP website. So you can see this full implementation in 2020. So here it comes. Hopefully there will be fewer provisionals. These 10 days of voting, there's no excuse for having provisional voting when you go vote. No, you can cancel your mail ballot. You can say, I am here to vote, and you can tell the registrar, this is my vote, no other vote. Go ahead. Human-centered process, yes, of course, human-centered, and we like it, and we're glad. And all these focus groups, thank you, LA, they did their due diligence. But we're not sure all the people understood how their votes are counted, all the security implications. Okay, so that's that. Now the security implications of how these votes will be stored, how they'll be counted, that's our job, to make sure that all happens well. And if the system is a bust, and you will hear reasons why it could happen that way, then we'll have more work cut out for us, indeed. But we're going the other way in Sacramento because that incredibly stupid law that exempted ballots from audit when we had an audit on our ballots, and now we don't, as the provisionals and mail ballots grow bigger and bigger, that's guaranteeing that hackers can come into our late ballot count and do whatever they want. And that's unfair to America and to California. So again, please take a letter to Padilla and say, got to issue an emergency regulation. We have to audit every single ballot pool. It has to be at risk for audit at the very least to deter hackers. You've left the door unlocked and put a sign on the window going, not home, come on in and take what you want. Just do it in the late ballot count. Yes. Okay. This will be my last, and then we're going to Judy. Dear Secretary Padilla, this year voters and the public are anxious about U.S. election integrity. This is not the year to leave any portion of California's computer-counted ballots free from risk of hand audit. Yet, California's election law, AB 840, did exactly that, left the computer count of late-arriving mail ballots and provisional ballots free from mandatory audit. That computer count in every county can, as it stands now, go unchecked. You are responsible for California election security. We voters urge you to exercise that responsibility by issuing an emergency regulation to restore all ballots to mandatory hand audit of machine results. All outcomes, including the fiercely fought federal balance of power, may depend on ballots currently outside California's audit pool. Security demands that you verify all outcomes as reflecting the people's voice, not an intruder's wish. Sincerely, name, address, and email. Please send one of these in. And we will hopefully, I want to get a petition going, and we will get that out to KPFK and everybody else. Stay tuned. We should demonstrate, pass this letter out at your meetings. We're going to start ramping it up. This has to happen within a month. We got to deter the hackers. Thank you. Now, Judy Alter, Dr. Judy Alter, please come up here and explain our situation in LA County and California.
How's the mic? Am I all right? Hi, folks. Pardon? A little closer. Okay, I want to thank everybody who's here. I want to thank our genius Tom English. Is it all right? Okay, I want to thank Levy for this wonderful panel, Dick and Sharon for, having this double panel, and all of the activists that have done this wonderful work. All right. We're uncounted paper ballots, Protect California ballots. We stand for hand-counted paper ballots, and you have to know that banks hand count their money every night before they go home. And that's why, our ballots are equally valued to money. That's why they want to steal them. So we have to hand count paper ballots. That's the only way you know if anything is accurate around the world. Okay. The bill SB 360 on our website, protectcaliforniaballots.org, has many, many flaws, and that bill is what has empowered our new system, the expensive pencil. We have a ballot marking device. The law says that if the county owns the system, LA County is now contracting with SmartTech. You heard how bad SmartTech is, but we'll own it. Smartmatic, okay. Okay, they haven't made the code yet. It's owned by the county and uses disclosed or open source software, and it's used in a pilot. You ready for this? The machines will not be tested and certified before use. They will not be tested and certified before use. SB 360 took out independent federal election double checking, testing and certifying. It took out independent California testing and certifying, and gave the Secretary of State all the power to get the ballot certified, appoint the people who do the testing, and there is no oversight. It's going to happen in March 2020, and we're trying everything we can to stop to have these new expensive pencils being used without being tested and certified. They're going to be tabulated with a QR code. Now, in our table back there, we have a picture of a QR code. It's a barcode. And so we don't know whether your selections will actually be in it unless you have an app on your phone, and not everybody has that. But it's still secretly counted on computers. Okay. I'm into the weeds now. When you have a ballot marking device and it prints out your ballot and you look at it, it's called selections only. That means it's supposed to print out what contests and candidates you voted for and which you did not. None for which you did not. That's the problem. You have to have your sample ballot for which you used to compare to the selections only on that paper ballot, because of course they could leave out some of your selections. And unless you know that and you need to check it, that's another limitation of this expensive pencil, this ballot marking device that's going to be counted, tabulated on a QR code. This is in the law, that they can use this without testing. We're terrified to have this, in this. even in a pilot, they want to pilot with every language group, and you saw there are 9 language groups. Anyway, we have lots of detail, and our appeal to Alex Padilla to just independently test and certify, and he said they will, and I quoted him the bill that said they won't. So we have all this dialogue, all the problems. There are several more problems in SB 360 that are hair-raising, you know, in addition to, we took out the independent testing. Okay, let me tell you, Mimi gave you the positives about the new voting center bill, SB 450. Okay, luckily it's an option in California. Many counties can choose to use it or not. Everybody will be issued an absentee ballot. Now, I want to walk into the myths about voting by mail, absentee ballot. Years ago, and even the Democrats said, oh, it increases voter turnout. Well, the facts they were using were Washington State and Oregon, who had initially the highest voting turnout in the country before they used absentee. Everybody. Their turnout went down when they issued issued by mail. So the idea that vote by mail is increasing turnout is a myth. Okay, so SB 450 with the voting centers is for everybody to have an absentee ballot. You can mail it in, you can hand it in, or we now have ballot harvesting. Now, that sounds like what it is. Our absentee ballots right now, if you want somebody to hand it in and you don't mail it or bring it in yourself, you put on the envelope, the pink envelope, whom you are handing it to hand in, right? So one person hands in one ballot. Ballot harvesting allows anybody to bring in any number of ballots.
What?
In 13 states, it's a felony to do that. Okay, now let me talk to you about the issues of the voting centers. There are seniors, there are hospitals that are sent, many people that can't get to a voting center, and there are those, are used to walking to their precinct. We have 5,780 precincts in LA County. Now we will have, I thought it was 800 voting centers. Now, not all of them will be open for 10 days. If we have details on our website about if you have local cities, they're open for 3 days. If you have this number of people, they're open for 5 days. So not everybody is going to have an option, you know, for the 10 days. So that's also important to know. Now, I'm in the weeds. Judy always gives detail. Okay. They're closed at night, and there's a kind of mailbox into which you can drop any number of absentee ballots. Good security, right? And you either break the camera or just put, I guess people have seen it on television, you put a coat over it and you do whatever you want in or out of those mailboxes. And this is our chain of custody. You know, chain of custody. How many ballots you give out, how many are voted on, how many are not, how many are spoiled, and all the count has to be the same as what you started with. The shortest chain of custody is election day. It's 1 day, right? You start, you stop. Boom. Absentee ballot is the longest. It's 29 days. We, among other things in LA County, forced the chain of custody in the absentee ballot room. Those ballots come in for 29 days and they go to 8 stations, and we forced them to actually batch and date and assign who handles which ballots, because they didn't have that in the biggest county, and you heard the numbers. Okay, the intermediate chain of custody is early voting centers, and you heard Mimi already talking about the security. You know, what happens to the ballots at night, and who's observing. We observe the collection centers on election night, our group, or, you know, we have people who've done that. But who's going to be observing all those centers for the 10 days of the ones that are open. So this opportunity to go to voting centers is fraught with layers of challenge and insecurity and personal problems. Let me see what else. I told you that. Okay. We're using electronic poll books. What does that sound like? You know, when you sign your credit card name, does that look like your name? Does that match the signature on your registration card? And what if they fail? And they're famous for failing. And they're not supposed to, nothing in our elections is supposed to be connected to the internet. But the electronic poll books are connected to the statewide database. Oops! We're on the internet for signing in. This is what's coming in LA County. The model, this is Dean Logan, our registrar, we've gotten him to follow 5 laws that he was breaking. One was a felony. He modeled the voting centers on Colorado. Colorado has 2 big cities, and because they were a touchscreen county, state, about 70% of the voters voted by mail. We heard this from this Secretary of State from Colorado. So they were used to, driving to the vote centers. In suburban, urban, way out in the boondocks. California doesn't have that model at all. We have big cities all over. The model doesn't work. And give you one more insight. I wonder if you know our neighbor, Orange County. Neil Kelly does a really remarkable job of processing his ballots. He did a pilot of 7 voting centers a year ago. He will never, never, never use the voting centers because of what he learned. We're having difficulty finding 700. They have to have connectivity, they have to have access, they have to have parking, they have to have handicap, they have to have so many. I have this all listed summarized on our website, all this detail. So they are so problematic in California and in our big county that they sound good, but they have very serious limitations. One more minute. So what do we need? Well, we need to stop the uncertified and untested machines. We need legislators who will listen and fix the election code so we can use sort, stack, count the fast way that banks do instead of the slow way that we do our audit. One, don't want to challenge elections, so we haven't gotten anybody. Deborah Bowen helped us. And Deborah Bowen got California's all paper ballots. All paper ballots. The thing is, they have to be counted accurately, and human eyes and human hands and human brains have to do it. And it's a very big uphill battle. So.
Thank you, Judy.
All right, and now I'm going to bring up Jim Soper to the microphone. He's legislative expert. And Jim, thank you. The last piece of info we need.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mimi, for inviting all of these great speakers. I am Jim Soper. I'm author of a website called CalCountyDiscuss.org. I'm co-chair of the Voting Rights Task Force in Northern California. I've been at this since 2005. I am a geek, senior software consultant, formerly at Digital Equipment. I've been a programmer for both artificial intelligence and mobile apps, and you can see my email address at the bottom there. Please feel free to write me. JimSoper2@gmail.com. S-O-P-E-R, I'm a Soper. And I like to start off by saying, how did I get into this back in 2005? Well, in most states, if you're a felon, or sometimes even if you're an ex-felon, you're not allowed to vote. But in February 2005, I didn't make it in there. I'll just tell you this. The Voting Rights Task Force was brand new. They held a teach-in, First National teach-in that Bob was at, and Emily was there. And afterwards, I was told by Jim March Simpson, you know that the Devo machines were programmed by somebody with 23 convictions for embezzlement.
What?
In the Devo Gems software. I'm a programmer, and it's like, oh my God. And I immediately understood what that's about. We need to get one, we have to look at the code he's writing. We have to know who wrote it. Is he a convicted embezzler? This basically gets into something called open source software or disclosed source. Disclosed source means anybody in the public can look at it. Open source means that anybody in the public can look at that source code. Yes, you have to be a programmer, but there's lots of programmers out there. And anybody can use it and do what they want with it depending on the license, and that gets real complicated real fast. Comment about LA. On March 7th, there was a hearing in Sacramento of the Elections Committee in the Senate. And Senator Ben Allen asked the Registrar of Los Angeles County, Dean Logan, what do you think about open source? His answer was, we're using an open source platform. Huh? I had some public comment there where I said it was really bizarre. I got on CBS TV for one sentence, the greatest threat is from insiders. And then the reporter immediately jumps back to the outsider threats were from Russia. So she didn't hear what I said, but that happens. I talked to Mr. Logan afterwards and I said, well, when you're saying open source platform, what does that mean? Essentially, that means we're running it on Linux. But our own software that we're writing is not necessarily going to be disclosed or open source. And I asked him, well, when will we know? What are you going to do? And he says, I haven't decided yet. He doesn't have to decide yet. But you're still seeing a lot of talk, including recently from Alex Padilla, about LA open source, LA open source. When will they publish it? I don't know. I don't know that they will. So when you hear open source coming out of LA, ask, when are they going to publish it? Because we haven't seen it. San Francisco is not as far as long, but they're working on it. And the city, I believe, the city budget came up with $1 million to hire somebody to really start the project off. What was my biggest disappointment of this year was that the state decided to come up with $134 million to buy new election equipment. And the assembly member and senator from San Francisco put in a separate line item, let's get $8 million to San Francisco to build this thing. The only open source system in the country at this point. We had a couple other hopes. LA is not committed. And what's really disappointing is in May, they announced they found $9 billion extra in the budget. San Francisco is asking for less than 1% of the extra they found. And the state couldn't find the money to do that. So we're going to have to push at that next year and try to get that going. The biggest thing is, again, and I keep on repeating, I've been repeating for 15 years, insiders are the biggest threat. Yes, Russians or whoever are a new threat. I'm glad that it's getting publicity, but it's the people with the access, the programmers, the election officials, the poll workers who have easy access to these systems, and that's your biggest threat. You know, our computers are mostly made in China. They just discovered on some of these election systems Chinese songs. That's not surprising. These things are made in China. We always are going to have to introduce this. Okay, the next slide. I got this out of order. That's the Jeffrey Dean. That's the conviction papers. Let's go on. SD 450. Judy made a nice discussion of that. You need to understand that that's county optional. The county does not have to do this. And Orange County isn't going to do this. And several other counties are probably not going to do it. You need to organize by county and talk to your board of supervisors and to the registrar. And if you like it, say fine. If you don't like it, say don't do it. There will be hand-marked paper vote by mail ballots available for everyone, and that's the best way to vote. Now, the disaster that happened a year ago, August 24th, and we're two days after that, they snuck in a bill into AB 840, which was originally about vote by mail signatures. But on August 24th, that's very late in the process, so I use the word snuck in the bill. Assemblymember Quirk asked the county election officials, who said, we want you to add in this little clause here. Oh, by the way, it's not controversial. Haha. And what it meant was that normally you have a 1% ballot. You're going to check all the ballots from 1% of the precincts in a county. And they said, you no longer have to include provisional ballots or vote by mail ballots that have to arrive at the county after Tuesday. They don't have to be in the audit. We're talking about 30% of the ballots. 30% of 12 million ballots, 4 million ballots that are not going to be audited. And a registrar called Ray Lutz, who called me and said, what the hell's going on? I wrote people in Sacramento. And we had to put up a very quick fight for this to block it, and we did not succeed because the registrars are very, very powerful momentum.
Michael Vu.
Again, your county, including LA, may audit all the ballots. But you have to go to your registrar and you have to go to your county supervisors and say, you got to audit those things or subject them to audits. Your county has the choice. Make that happen, please. And then there's a little bit of a success story. The Voting Rights Task Force and Ballots for Bernie ran a conference last October, and we invited Assemblymember Quirk to come up and talk about his bill. He accepted, and we had a very good panel, and after we got done with that, Mr. Quirk said, I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to tell the governor to hold off signing that for a week. Changed his mind a bit. He wound up introducing it and asking the governor on the last day to sign it. And so that was that, but then we had established a relationship with Mr. Quirk. And we contacted him and we contacted Dr. Philip Stark, who's the inventor of something called risk-limiting audits. Now, it is not totally wonderful because people don't understand what a risk-limiting audit is. You use statistics to figure out how many ballots you need to check to verify that the results are correct. If it's a landslide, you don't need to look at many. If it's close, you need to look at a lot of them. And what's not in the 1% audit is that if you're checking the ballots and they're not going in the right direction, you escalate. And you keep on escalating until you count all of them if you have to. Well, we wound up working with registrars. Mr. Quirk introduced a bill called AB 2125. And this time, we got a coalition going with verified voting, Voting Rights Task Force, Common Cause, Clean Money Campaign, California Voter Foundation, and others. In June, they had said, well, we want to do this with ballot images. And we said, hell no. And all of us said, we're opposed. And 10 minutes before the hearings start, we get this sheet, here's 5 amendments. They changed it. So now that bill is likely to be accepted. It's gone through the committees. It will go to the Senate floor. And yeah, all ballots will be subject to audit, including provisionals, and all vote by mail. And some other things. It's just for 2020. And it's a pilot, and they'll look at it afterwards. Quickly, trying to get across, we're having an impact. If you get up and do things, you can have an impact. It's kind of like amazing. Here's a list of things where we've had an impact, including blocking 4 internet voting bills in California. This is the most dangerous thing we have to face is internet voting, smartphone voting. We blocked them. California's ground zero for this stuff. We had help from Republicans, by the way. So in 2018, we're looking at the risk limiting audit bill. We're coming out of 2018 with a very good coalition. We have much more clout than we did in January. So I think we're going to make some more progress here. You've got to have alliances. You've got to take the time to build up relationships, teamwork, perseverance, a lot of hard work. Do your homework, learn the rules of how Sacramento works or how your county works. Focus on the strategic issue, and of course, there's a lot of dumb luck. And sort of to finish here, how do you start? 1, become a poll worker. Volunteer to become a poll worker. You're going to see how it looks from the inside. Organize your county. Both for the thing about the vote center and risk limiting audits, because risk limiting audits is also county optional. They don't have to do it, they may do it. Connect with others. And one last point here, in California we have a bizarre little thing called a civil grand jury. A civil grand jury is not a criminal one, it's civil. And if you can convince them that there was malfeasance going on in an election, you're going to have some damn good evidence. But if you can go to your county grand jury and convince them that something's up, they have the right to investigate. They have the right to subpoena. They have the right to do a lot of things that we don't. Keep that in mind. If you have good evidence, take it to them and see what you can do. And last, a little quote from Josiah Bartlett. Decisions are made by those who show up. So please, you showed up here. Fabulous. Continue to show up. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to remind everybody that if you are a vote-by-mail voter, you must surrender your mail ballot at the polls if you choose to vote at the polls instead. Otherwise, you will be made to vote provisional. Please go and check your registration on the California Secretary of State website. It will say there whether you are signed up as a vote-by-mail ballot or registrant or not. Lots of people at my polls are surprised by their status and they never looked for their mail ballot and they don't have it and they are made to vote provisional. I just want to warn you, it's called the surrender rule and it's not publicized. So it's a trick to make you vote provisional. This year, if you vote provisional, your vote can be switched in the computer because it will not be part of the audit. Protect yourself. Thank you. 2018 midterms are very unprotected by anybody but you. So do what you can to be an at-polls regular voter, or if you vote by mail, use that ballot and send it in early. If you drop it off at the polls on election day, guess what? It becomes a late counted mail ballot, also not audited. So your mail ballot, if you drop it off at the polls, that can also be switched in the computer with no detection. So I would encourage you, vote by mail. If you use it, hand it in as early as you can. Get it in a week early. Do not let it be late. And they might slow down the mails. Don't be a provisional voter and don't hand in your mail ballot at the polls or vote it late. And that's it. I want to thank the panel, which is awesome. every single one. Judy, Jim, Harvey, Bob, Emily, and John Brakey over here on tech is the founder of the piece of the ballot images that helped in Alabama, and it's going to help all over the nation. Thank you very much. Do we have time for Q&A? I'd like to have it. Go ahead, let's go. Yeah, why don't you take mine?
I'm very frustrated because this is so complicated and I lose all of you in the weeds that you talk about, but I know you're doing prodigious amounts of work and I really want to congratulate you on that. It's like ants eating into a huge mountain, but I know you're making progress. However, I kind of like to make things standardized and simplified. I think that's the only way that we can really have a control on these things, and it seems like there's so many different options for every kind of situation. So to me, it's just, I like to reduce the complicity, and these are just some suggestions I'll say real quickly. It should be, all of this work should be local. All of the voter inspections and everything should be local. And yes, over many days. And the polling places, you know, I remember when there was an election where they changed all the polling places and people who were in old age homes and senior centers and in recuperating places, there was a core of people that were wheeling them down the street because they changed their polling places. And so we should have the polling places in senior centers, old age homes, hospitals, clinics, community centers, and churches. And yes, it should be open many days, 24 hours a day, well lit and with cameras going all the time, changing your staff shifts to watch the voting and with cameras and everything. I mean, but we have to do that locally and universally, and everything should be open with lights and cameras. Thank you.
And who are you, ma'am?
They're taking input on the VSAP website about the placement of voting centers and which ones will be 24 hours right now. I would encourage you to get to that website or call the registrar. VSAP, or just call the LA Register and say I have input about placement of voting centers and where to do them 24 hours. They are asking you to do that now, but of course nobody advertises it. Yes?
Kind of a specific question. I, some months back, participated in one of these little things that made those nifty 4-color brochures from the county. And I talked to some of the people there at the time, and I asked the question that was kind of on my mind: how's it going finding locations for voting centers? And they admitted they were having a little trouble with it. Apparently it's not as easy to find a place that you can occupy for 10 days as it is to find a place you can occupy for 1 day. So I wonder if anybody has any idea what's going on with that. Has it changed?
Chris is the webmaster for Protect California Ballots. They've opened, they are really having serious trouble, and you need to know what, Neil Kelly, you need the connectivity with electricity that's sufficient for all that electronic stuff. So that's the first problem. The second is accessibility. They open, there's a blurb on the VSAP website that says they're asking the community for input. They're not getting it because the people don't know it. What this commenter before said, they should be, most of the precincts are in that where you already said, the old age homes, the recreational centers, churches. There's detail about voting in churches, but I'll go sideways. Schools, but they can't have them for 10 days, so they're having serious, serious trouble. LAvote.net, that gets to the website. I want to go sideways to another geek message. One of the most original, we heard Bev Harris was on the first video with the original Fraction Magic. Okay, Bev Harris's in California when we started in 2004 was Jim March. Jim March said about open source software, and I'm quoting another geek who can program. If lots of programmers, not citizens who don't know how to program, make the program, the open source, that many people can hack it. Now, another thing is once the ballot definition, the detail of the elections goes on any program, any software, it's automatically proprietary and no one can look at it. So having open source rather than closed source, this source, that source, is still secret vote counting, counting on computers. So there are really serious problems, even with this disclosed software's open source stuff.
One, if you use open source software, everything involved, or damn near everything involved, is open to the public, including, it can be looked at by people who can read it. It is open to people who can read it. Yes, there's a problem there, but two, I will always say, and I said this from at least 2006, we always have to have paper ballots and hand-counted audits, even with open source.
Final question I'm going to let John Brakey answer. A difficulty, yes?
We have another question over here. We have two more.
Okay, well, we have quite a few. This one came in half an hour ago, so may I let John answer this. A difficulty with existing election integrity movement strategy is that it relies on official consent to move forward, willingness to allow access to ballot images. That's fine where officials are honest, but it matters most where they aren't. And lawsuits may not force them to accede. What's your strategy to develop evidence when officials refuse to cooperate? What's your trump card? Where is your citizen audit that doesn't require official cooperation?
You know, that's a very good question. And we do have a trump card. I call it Mr. Mandamus. It's a writ of mandamus. These officials are mandated by law to save these records. They cannot destroy them. I've been traveling the country for the last year. You can't believe how many people say, well, I didn't turn that feature on. It doesn't work unless it's on. What we do is that we go in and we investigate, then we educate them, and then we say, you're mandated to do this. And if you don't do it, I will file an emergent writ of mandamus. And that will get us into court very quickly. And then we go into court and we basically say, Your Honor, could you please order these people to follow the law? Because here is the law. And the sad thing, they're doing it all over the place. We might be suing Virginia next. We're talking about going after Massachusetts. I'll be in Florida next in about 10 days for 10 days with my lawyer. And we are doing everything we can. But we do need people to understand that we do need elections that are transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. I want you to know the system with these ballot images has been around for 8 years, and they're keeping it well hidden because they call them a can of rocks. And the can of rocks is that you can download these things by precinct. You should be able to go ahead and do an audit. When we talk about the clickers, there's teams of 2 people. Let's say me and Mimi are one team, and we're counting, and Emily and Bob are counting for somebody else. They count 25 ballots at a time. They stop. We got 12, good. What'd you guys get? 10, good. Next 25. Very, very fast. We know that once this starts happening, people will start building programs on a precinct level. You'll download your precinct ballots. You'll fill out an app, and that app will take everything. And what are we trying to do? I've learned for over 14 years, if you want to take away somebody's impunity to cheat, you understand the system that we're getting hard, you'll find where they're stealing. If you understand. Now, it took me 10 years to figure it out, you know, working with some of the best geeks, because it took a geek to help me understand the Greek language of elections, and we're doing it. And I'll say this, I'm very optimistic of what we can do working together and using our friend, Mr. Mandamus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. All right, yes.
Just a quick, my understanding was there were 3 places, like Miami being one of them, somewhere else, I believe this was 2016, and it was after everything was counted, and then they sent it to a central location, and that's where it was hacked, like it went over the satellite, or it went to the internet, and then they hacked it.
In the middle. Okay, John was in there.
You're talking about the Tim Canova race? That's the one in 2016. It was a very high profile. In fact, that's where I'm going. Tim Canova has become a very close friend. Soon after his election, usually, you know, it filters out that if you want to figure out what happened in your election, call Brakey. And I'm Brakey. And we're looking to put the brakes on election fraud, okay? That's the big pun. And by making it, like I said, transparent. That was a very bizarre election. They destroyed the images at first and said they didn't exist. And then when he went ahead, put the case together with Lulu Freisdek, because I was very busy, I got Lulu to jump in, she took the case over, and incredible that he lost by 13% supposedly. He was running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I never even knows who she is. She's the one who rigged the whole DNC against Bernie, okay? And so he took her to the clerk to court, won the court case, $200,000. Guess what? Nothing happens again. Over and over, this is happening. That doesn't mean we give up. We try harder and we keep exposing it, and we are. And so we are making progress on that front. He has quit the Democratic Party because there's no support. He's running as an independent because primaries sometimes can be a trap, especially when you haven't got support and you're running against one of the most corrupt Democrats in the House of Representatives.
They destroyed the ballots. They finally were going to get access to the paper ballots in that election, only to find out that the registrar of the county had destroyed the paper ballots illegally with impunity. Nothing happened. All right, did we have one more? Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys so much for this super important panel and making all of this information accessible in one place. I would be remiss not to mention that I have a postcard booth set up where anyone can write to any elected official back there. So you can write to Padilla, send them a postcard today.
Padilla.
And I am an organizer by profession. And since Trump got elected, helped co-found a side project called The Constituents, where we started doing the postcard booth at farmers markets last spring, or 2 springs ago already, when people were just, you know, everything was under attack and people just needed something to do to act. And then we developed a zine, which is we call it The Constituents Guide to Civic Engagement, and it explains electoral democracy and has all the information. So feel free to grab a copy there. We are raising money to keep printing them and keep getting them out as far as possible. And there's definitely opportunities where we can collaborate. We should, in a future issue about the new elections and polling and all that, we'll, collaborate. So
I'll see you after. Thank you. That's why things are going to get better. Thank you so much. All right, panelists, I think we're done. We have to move out of here. They have to get ready for the Martin Luther King event. Would anybody like to say any last word, or should we let our people go? Jim.
I'll just repeat what I finished with. Decisions are made by people who show up and be a poll worker. Thank you.
I think the good news is if we have a very fair vote count, we'll get rid of these creeps. So let's get a fair vote count.
Tell everybody you know to vote and outvote the rigging. Don't let them be discouraged no matter what. You know, bad candidate, all that nonsense. Vote, vote, vote. Outvote the rigging. Nobody should stay home.